Ever feel like you think too much? Like you sense things no one else seems to notice? As if you're seeing the world through eyes you weren't supposed to have. And because of that, no one really gets you. It's not weakness, it's clarity. But think about it. What if seeing too much is exactly what isolates you? What if the pain you carry is the price of no longer being able to pretend? There's a point where awareness stops being light and becomes exile. This video is about that, about the bitter elegance of those who've seen too much and still keep going. In a world built for acceptance, thinking differently is a social risk. Most people aren't after truth, they're after belonging. To be accepted, validated, seen as part of the group. And the price for that? Swallowing ideas that make no sense, repeating beliefs you never questioned, staying silent in the face of absurdity just to avoid being the odd one out. The collective offers comfort, but it comes at a cost. It demands silence in the face of contradiction. It expects you to smile, even when everything inside you is screaming that something's off. Most people don't lie because they're bad. They lie because they're weak. Because they learned early on that thinking too much leads to trouble, and feeling too much does too. So they mold themselves, adjust, until the mask becomes their skin. This creates a system of collective lying so well crafted that anyone who dares to see beyond becomes a threat. The one who chooses clarity inevitably starts to belong less, and that hurts. Not because of the loneliness itself, but because deep down you know it could all be avoided, if only you pretended. But the lucid can't pretend, and that's when everything shifts. You realize that seeing too much isn't just a gift, it's a rupture. You lose friends, lose your sense of identification, lose your place in the herd. Lucidity strips away the comfort of us and throws you into the cold of me. And ironically, it's in that isolation that your awareness starts to breathe. It's in that moment that the price of truth becomes clear. You won't be hated for being wrong, but for not repeating everyone else's mistake. There's a quiet moment when everything shifts. You don't exactly choose to think differently, it just happens. A thought slips through the veil. A discomfort becomes impossible to ignore. A question you've always avoided refuses to die. And suddenly, what used to be invisible becomes painfully clear. Fake relationships, empty conversations, twisted values, all of it lights up with an unbearable glare. What once felt like background noise turns into an alarm, a loud, pulsing discomfort that screams, "Something here is wrong." And once you hear that scream, it never shuts up again. Clarity doesn't arrive like a gentle light. It strikes like lightning. Suddenly you realize most people's happiness is built on distractions, compulsions, and emotional escapes. Ignorance is dressed up as optimism. Denial is sold as faith. And you, now more awake, start feeling out of place in a world you can no longer agree with. That's when awareness stops being a blessing and starts becoming a burden. Because seeing too much doesn't mean you know what to do with what you saw. You carry questions no one wants to answer. And worse, you see answers in people who haven't even asked the question yet. The price of seeing the unseen is losing the innocence of ignorance. That kind of peace that only exists when you still believe in neat promises, flawless authorities, and absolute truths handed to you on a silver platter. Once awakened, there's no way back. And no matter how much you try to reconnect with that earlier simplicity, you just don't fit anymore. It's like pretending the taste of freedom never hit your tongue. Reality now has layers, contradictions, and uncomfortable details. And with each new vision, you drift further from the surface where everyone else keeps pretending to live. The loneliness of the lucid isn't just the absence of company. It's the discomfort of being conscious in a place still ruled by unconsciousness. It's looking around and realizing the conversations don't feed you anymore, The things that move others don't reach you. The rules of the game just don't make sense to you. Not because you're better, but because you reached a crossroads before they did. And that creates a gap between you and the others, between you and who you used to be, between you and everything that hasn't arrived yet. This kind of loneliness is quiet and hard to explain. You try to share, but words seem to fall short. You try going back to familiar places, but now they feel tight, like clothes that no longer fit. And the more you try to blend in, the more fake you feel. The world keeps laughing, dancing, chasing the same things as always. And there you are, standing still, watching it all with a kind of exhaustion that isn't physical. It's soul-deep fatigue, the kind that comes from realizing some voids can't be filled with distraction, and some truths, once seen, separate you from the crowd forever. There's a specific kind of pain in watching something fall apart while everyone else is still celebrating it. It's like watching a castle crumble in slow motion while the party keeps going inside. That's the pain of waking up early. It's not arrogance, it's exile. It's carrying awareness like a secret no one wants to hear. But paradoxically, it's also the beginning of a rare kind of freedom, the freedom of no longer needing to belong. Because once you survive the first fall, the fall from belonging, from illusion, from your old identity, you stop accepting just any company, any narrative, any ready-made truth. Loneliness stops being a punishment and starts becoming fertile ground. Society tolerates almost everything, except those who refuse to play along. The presence of someone who thinks for themselves effortlessly exposes the shallowness of the majority. A lucid person doesn't need to be loud or confrontational to make others uncomfortable. Just being fully present, without bending, is enough. Because in a world addicted to masks, authenticity feels like an attack. And the ones who won't bow down eventually become targets. First, they're dismissed, then isolated, and if that's not enough, they're attacked, labeled, silenced. Because their very presence says what no one wants to hear. This is a lie, and I won't be part of it. That's where the great names come in, the ones remembered selectively when it's convenient. Jesus, for instance, wasn't killed for loving people. He was killed for confronting power. He challenged systems, broke traditions, exposed hypocrisy, and that made him unbearable to those who profited from the lie. That subversive figure was hijacked and turned into a symbol of obedience, used by institutions to tame consciousness. What was once rebellion became doctrine. What was once courage became compliance. And if he came back today, he'd probably be rejected by the very people who claimed to follow him. Because spiritual lucidity is still dangerous, especially when it's real. Every lucid man is crucified, either standing or from the inside. Lucidity doesn't come as a blessing, it comes as a rupture. It pulls you from the herd, severs your ties, rips your certainties apart. You start seeing what no one else dares to look at, and that bothers people. It bothers them so much, sooner or later, they'll want to shut you up. If you speak, you're arrogant. If you stay quiet, you're weird. If you keep going, they'll try to reduce you to a label, a meme, a joke. And if that doesn't work, they'll cast you in bronze, but only after you're dead. Because as long as you're too alive, too thoughtful, too lucid, you're a threat. And the world doesn't know what to do with someone who doesn't need to pretend. Jesus, Socrates, Nietzsche, they all met the same fate. They understood too much, too soon. And in a world addicted to collective lies, that's an unforgivable crime. Lucidity doesn't make you a martyr, it makes you a target. And while others celebrate ignorance with plastic smiles, you learn to carry the burden of thinking, with the bitter elegance of someone who knows there's no cure for those who've seen too much. There's a quiet kind of dignity in continuing to think when everything around you is screaming for you to stop. When you've already realized there's no longer a comfortable place in the world for your awareness. That's where what we call bitter elegance is born. It's not superiority. It's a kind of existential sobriety. You're no longer trying to convince anyone. You're done explaining yourself. You just walk, carrying the weight of what you see and the silence of someone who knows most people aren't ready to hear it. This path isn't light, but it's real. And the real, even when bitter, is still more noble than the sweet lie of conformity. Socrates knew that. He didn't write anything. He just asked questions. And that's exactly what condemned him. His questions. His refusal to accept ready-made answers. His insistence on poking holes in people's certainties. That was too much for Athens. They preferred to see him dead than to hear him keep thinking out loud. But Socrates didn't rebel. He accepted the cup of poison with the serenity of someone who understands that truth doesn't need the majority's approval. He died the way he lived, consistent with his own mind. And in that, he left behind a legacy no system has ever been able to erase. Nietzsche knew it too. His lucidity pushed him to the edge. He wrote about the abyss, and eventually it swallowed him. But before that, he left behind words that still burn today, like bitter truths no one wants to digest. They called him mad, and maybe he was. But he was a madman who dared to think where others were too afraid to even step. His life was a raw portrait of the cost of no longer being able to lie to yourself. And even so, with everything against him, he kept writing, he kept thinking. And that's why, to this day, he still disturbs people. Because the lucid ones who keep thinking, even when broken, even when alone, they're never forgotten. They become beacons for those who, in silence, are also starting to wake up. If you've made it this far, it means some part of you has already woken up. Maybe you're still fighting it. Maybe you're trying to go back to who you used to be. But the truth is, once you see the machine behind it all, the game, the hypocrisy, the plastic smiles, you can't unsee it. And there's no shame in that. Because the pain that comes with lucidity isn't weakness. It's proof that you're alive, that you're aware, that you refuse to be just another numbed spectator in your own life. And only those who have the courage to keep thinking, even when everything inside begs for silence, are capable of carving out a new path. This journey isn't about being better than others. It's about refusing to settle for anything less than truth. It's about breaking free from the loop of unconscious repetition, forced validation, and lazy thinking. And if that makes you a target, so be it. Because the world has always needed, and will always need, people who see things before everyone else. People who aren't satisfied with shallow answers or the comfort of illusion. People who, even torn by the weight of awareness, still choose to stay conscious. That's where real strength lives, in those who feel everything, see everything, and keep going anyway. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt that quiet pain of seeing too much? Have you tried going back, only to realize it's too late? How are you dealing with that? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your experience. Someone reading might see themselves in your story. If this reflection hit you in any way, leave a like. It helps this video reach others who might be going through the same silent storm. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and send this to someone who needs to hear it. There are people out there ready to give up, only because they haven't realized that overthinking isn't a curse. It's a sign that you're waking up.